Hi there. I'm not
Hello there.
Leticia Callava. Unfortunately, she could not make it tonight. So I am filling in for her. And thank God I have my Ivette Gonzalez Petkovich with me because we have an amazing program. As you know, we started La Vista Latina really more to educate, and we want people to participate in everything that we're doing. And there's a lot of things that's happened since last week, but a lot of things have stayed the same. No matter what, Donald Trump seems to be having a lot of problems accepting that he
Exactly.
lost the race. So I think what we want to do tonight is talk about a little bit about what happened in the election, but we want to focus more on the future and what Democrats need to do in order to win elections in Florida. And we have great guests. Why don't you tell them who the guests are going to be?
Absolutely. And of course, we're missing Leticia tonight, but I must admit, if there was going to be a replacement, you
Oh,
are
thank you so
undoubtedly
much.
my number one choice. So so this evening we do have some really outstanding guests. So what our first guest is going to be an attorney and a former state representative, Juan Carlos Planas, very known to many of us as Mr. JC Planas. And also, before we start off with JC, we're going to have Chris Wills. He worked directly with the Biden campaign. And we'll talk a little bit more about what he did with them. And
You can
also
take the mask off, Chris. Come on. He doesn't want anybody to know that good looking
is that what it
behind the
is?
mask.
And so finally, Lourdes, I want to tell our viewers that we're also going to have FIU professor of political science and research analyst. Hello there, Dr. Eduardo Gamarra. He's been with us before, as has JC, and Chris is with us for the first time tonight. So those are our guests, and I'm super psyched about this conversation. Lourdes, it feels like as the days go by, we seem to be able to process and assess more and more. And really, I mean, it's going to take us a long time to fine tune how we change things for the future. But at least it feels like the more we learn and as more time goes by, we start seeing a little bit more of a clear picture as to how things will be different moving forward. So with that being said, I do think it's important, gentlemen who joined us, for those who are watching, I want to review a little bit about what's happened so that we can sort of start off this discussion on sort of where we were, where we're at, and where we're going. So, I mean, obviously we are elated that Joe Biden won the presidency, and I'm even more elated that this week it appears our president is finally coming to terms with that loss. However, unfortunately, President-elect Biden's performance in Miami-Dade County was very poor in the Hispanic community. And so that is the large question that we continue to ask ourselves here at La Vista Latina. Why is that? And obviously, what can we do to change that? Perhaps Republicans were successful in casting the former president as a socialist threat. I think there's a lot of credibility to that theory. And of course, we live in a community where a lot of people, come from socialist, communist countries. And I think also there's a possibility that the Black Lives Matter movement and the narrative around defunding the police, wasn't messaged properly and it wasn't presented properly here locally. And it just wasn't messaged properly. And so the result was that even though President Biden won, in many respects, President Trump won down ballot here in Florida. I mean, in 2016, what was it? It was like 290,000 votes that she received over Trump, whereas Biden now received, 85,000? That's almost 205,000 less votes in Miami-Dade County with an impeachment, 4 years of chaos, and a lot of opportunity for many of our Cuban Americans and Venezuelan Americans and Hispanic voters to see that this is not the right person for the job. And so, I think that to some degree, Republicans did cast Biden as sort of this Trojan horse for socialism. And it was a powerful pitch, especially among Cuban Americans who grew up or know the toll that the Fidel Castro style socialism took on Cuba. So with that being said, Lourdes, I kind of want to start off with JC, right? Our elections
of course,
lawyer.
with the lawyer, right?
With the lawyer. Exactly. I mean, listen, if we didn't, I always feel that the first step is to inform and to really put people in a position of knowing, so that then they can make their opinions. And so with that being said, hi, JC, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's nice to have you here. Are you happy to be with us?
Pleasure.
Can you hear us?
Listen, I had a blast the last time I was on the show. I'm very happy.
That's excellent.
So,
and I'm glad to hear you say that.
We're having a little bit of an audio delay.
Your sound is a little bit off, but that's okay. Hopefully, it's gonna get better. JC, I really want to talk to you about the race involving Jose Javier Rodriguez. He was a senator, and a Florida State senator rather. And I know that you represent him. Yesterday on CNN, in fact, there was a story sort of covering this talk about an Alex Rodriguez, who was a third candidate in the race. And I mean, my understanding is that former Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez lost by very few votes. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. Can you tell our viewers about this race and the role of this gentleman, Alex Rodriguez, and how that could have impacted the results?
It looks like he's frozen in time.
Oh no.
Oh no.
That's
Hello?
Okay. Is he there?
Can
you hear
there?
us, JC?
Technical difficulties. There you are.
There we go.
Did you hear the question? It was about the what happened with Jose
I did
Javier
not.
Rodriguez's race and the impact that it had, and that they put in Alex Rodriguez, which confused people. He got over 6,000 votes, and the race was so close that now we have Ileana Garcia. So could you tell us, I know that you're the attorney for Jose Javier and you've helped him. Could you give us a little bit of background on that?
Well, first of all, it was heartbreaking. I've known Jose since he was in a house. I followed his career. I've donated money to him. I was, a host on one of his events. And actually, I supported him back in the day when I was a Republican, even before I became a Democrat. The truth is that smart is smart, and Jose Javier Rodriguez is probably one of the best to ever serve Miami County. I mean, just a brilliant guy. Can you guys hear me? Is the sound better?
Yes.
Yeah, we
can hear you good.
Perfect.
All right. So, I mean, this was a heartbreaking loss. 37 votes in a recount. It was very heartbreaking. Now, I do take this as a lesson. Trump is asking for, we found, no votes in this recount. Trump is asking for a recount, in Georgia and in Wisconsin. Lets you know there's not going to be votes found there. So it shows for those who are worried about a recount in Wisconsin and the new machine recount in Georgia, you're not going to find new votes there. But we are investigating what happened with this Alex Rodriguez. There is no way that other higher ups in the Republican Party were not involved. Alex Rodriguez is someone who didn't seem to have a bank account in his financial disclosure form, although he lived in a house that he no longer owns there. But the truth is that he has a reputation around Miami-Dade County of owing money to a lot of people. And it's questionable as to how he was able to lend his campaign $2,000. I think as we investigate these different things and the individual authorities get involved, we'll find out what happened. And there are very likely there were laws broken, not just in the money that Alex Rodriguez got, but if he was paid or won, and how these fake companies that were set up to pay for the PAC that sent those mailers. I think, the one good thing that's going to come out of this is we're at least going to go down the rabbit hole on these dark money groups and find out just how nefarious they are, and maybe there'll be legislation to put an end to them.
JC, you said something, and Lourdes, I don't know if you had a question. I'm sorry if I'm jumping in, but JC, you said something. You said that, and I may not be quoting you perfectly. You said that there was no way that the Republicans up in Tallahassee, the leadership for the Republican Party, did not know about Mr. Rodriguez and his role, or at least what impact his candidacy could have on this race. Can you, for those who may not know Tallahassee, can you kind of expand on that a little bit? How must they have known? How do we know that?
Let me put it this way. All right. Let me put it this way. I was a member of the legislature for 8 years, which means that, I knew how leadership in the party worked. I have represented the Republican Party before. I've gotten involved in campaigns. There is no way that people higher up did not know that this was happening. The money has to come from somewhere. Somebody that money from proclivity. There were, over $200,000 for proclivity into a PAC. Who donated that money? I mean, the truth is that no entity is going to bring in $200,000 unless they're asked by someone at the top. The one thing that I got out of my 8 years in the legislature is Florida is a transactional state. You want to get laws passed, you want to get things done, you donate money. Somebody donated money because they knew they were going to get something out of it, or they were asked to donate money. After, in the interest of term limits, after certain laws were passed regarding how candidates can accept things from lobbyists or not, at the end of the day, this was a non-incumbent in Ileana Garcia who was challenging an incumbent member. There's only 40 senators, so you don't risk aggravating, half of the Senate unless leadership is asked. This goes all the way to the top. There's just no other way that this works.
Now that we have you, I'd like to bring up something that's also litigious. What is going on with Donald Trump and all the bogus lawsuits to try to change the results of our election? The more people I speak to, the more they feel so disgusted with our government, with our
They need to feel disgusted.
Yeah, it's like, what's happened to the Constitution of the United States, and it's just very frustrating.
Let's go back a second, because Donald Trump has refused to concede, and he's saying there's fraud in the election. There's fraud in the election. Well, I find fraud for a living. If there's fraud in the election, you will know the week before the election because you see the registrations. And if there was fraud and who voted, you know the day after. If you know these campaign mail pieces that you get at your house and everybody hates getting, well, the reason you're getting those campaign mail pieces is because the campaign has a list of everybody who's registered to vote. And if you notice, if you vote early or you vote by mail, you stop getting those campaign mail pieces so they know when you vote. The campaigns know who's voting and in real time. 6 years ago, I was working on a campaign in Doral where we found 20 people registered to vote in an office building. They ended up not voting, but we knew the week before the election they were registered there. If there was legitimate fraud, the Trump campaign would know, and they would have brought all this out. And they haven't because there's no fraud. Now, this is the problem. They've said in court that there's no fraud. They are saying that because of several procedural violations, they want to be able to throw out blocks of vote-by-mail ballots. Whether they were legal or not, for procedural violations, they want to throw them out. Now, obviously, on these ballot envelopes, you can't tell how they voted because the envelopes have been separated by the ballots. So they want to throw out huge swaths of these vote-by-mail ballots. Well, guess what? They want to do it in minority communities. They want to do it in urban Atlanta. They want to do it in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They want to do it in Philadelphia. They want to do it in Minneapolis now because there's a lawsuit in Minnesota. Well, what do all of these cities have in common? It's where minorities live. Now, what's funny is that there's no fraud because even in the big cities in Republican states, like in Dallas, Texas, or Mobile, Alabama, guess what? Biden won all those cities as well. Biden wins all the cities. So are we going to say that there's a conspiracy between the folks in Philadelphia, in Dallas, in Mobile, Alabama? No, there's not. If you look at Rudy Giuliani's press conference, it was absurdity on top of absurdity. They are trying to make people believe that a procedural violation invalidates a vote. We should all be disgusted by this. The fact that many Republicans refuse to speak out when they are witnessing the President of the United States encourage individuals to sue in court to invalidate minority voters because of procedural issues is bogus. First of all, they're not going to win in court because the law clearly states that in order to invalidate a vote, you have to have substantive fraud, not a procedural violation. A procedural violation is not going to invalidate the vote of someone who is otherwise lawfully allowed to vote. And the fact that they're trying to do this, even though we know they're going to fail, even though they may know they're going to fail, the fact that they're even attempting it. I mean, if I were one of these voters in Philadelphia, I'd be filing a bar complaint against one of these attorneys. I'd be filing a civil rights action against the plaintiff.
So what is he trying to do? To completely destroy the Republican Party? Because I cannot believe that these Republicans, these senators, and these congressmen, a few have come out, but most of them, it seems like they don't have a spine. I'm so proud of you that you kept your moral ground and you said, I can't be part of this party anymore. And it's a shame because the two-party system is what kept the democracy going for so long. So what's going to happen to the future of the party?
I had always been a social liberal, and I was, when I joined the party back in the 80s, it was the party of common sense. Even when I got elected in 2002, I remember when Alan Bentz, a Republican Speaker of the House, was Speaker, Democrats were wearing Alan Bentz for Senate buttons because Bentz had done so much for the Democrats in the budget. The party has come so far from those ideals to the point that it doesn't represent me anymore. And the truth is that Joe Biden is the type of politician I've always liked. I was very encouraged today with the word that Manny Diaz, former mayor of the city of Miami, is now running for chair of the Democratic Party of Florida. I'm a Manny Diaz Democrat. I think Manny Diaz represents the ideals that I believe in. And some of this is my evolution, but another part of it is the Republican Party is just standing for some disgusting principles right now. The fact that they can't stand up and condemn a president who is trying to disenfranchise minority voters, this should be unspeakable. The problem is there are individuals, and it goes to why we lost so many votes in this community. Sadly, there are those among us, even friends and family. I mean, my wife and I don't talk about this to certain family members because we believe that they're brainwashed. And I know it sounds funny, but it's just how they act sometimes. So, and you'll talk about this with Chris Wills later about how hard it was to penetrate this Miami market. But when I see it in my own family members that they can't bring themselves to say Trump lost fair and square and what Trump is doing now is bad. They see this as good. They see it as like they're saving something. I mean, at the end of the day, the relation, and I hate to use hyperbolic language, but when Donald Trump starts talking like Jim Jones, you almost got to warn these folks saying, hey, if they give you something purple to drink, throw it on the ground. Don't drink it, for God's sakes. Because that's how it sounds like it's going to end.
Well, absolutely. I just want to let everybody know that with Manny Diaz, I share children and grandchildren. So just keep that out there. So I'll just keep quiet for now. Ivette, if you have any more questions about Manny Diaz, go ahead.
Well, JC, I had made a note here because I obviously I was made aware of that, and I read that earlier today. And while you obviously you sort of gave a very positive testimonial about Manny Diaz, would you kind of, I want to follow up on that a little more. I mean, do you think that he could be the answer to rebuilding the party? Do you think his ties to South Florida and his understanding of the Hispanic community after being, a Democrat in that community for so many years could be of value? I mean, those are some of the things that I'm thinking of. I don't want to, put my thoughts in your head, but like, can you take that a little bit further? Do you think Manny is the right choice, and could he help us rebuild?
I mean, if his son rebuilt the defense of the Hurricanes, why not? Listen, if there's anything that this election taught us, is that pragmatism triumphs idealism. I do think that, Manny's successes in the city of Miami, Manny's bravery to decide to be judged by history rather than the current state of affairs. I mean, Manny was a futurist in many ways in the city of Miami, whether it was Miami 21, whether it was his tackling of climate change, sea level rise. Manny was certainly someone who was looking to the future. One of the things that we're combating with Republicans now is Republicans seem to want to go backward in time and not to the future. So right. I think we need leaders that want to go to the future. I do think Manny can raise money, which I think is extremely important to the Democratic Party. But just the fact that, again, remember that the last time that, some of the biggest success stories that we had with the Democratic Party in Florida was in 1992 and 1996 with Simón Ferro, the first Cuban head of the Democratic Party. So, the truth is that having a Cuban American who can speak to the folks here and say, hey, listen, we are the furthest thing from socialism that there is. I think that's going to be very important. But the truth is that the pragmatism and the business approach that Manny brings, I think, is very important.
I cannot echo your sentiments anymore. And for me, the one that just seems most powerful is just, exactly that, the fact that he is a Cuban American, that he is going to be sort of in the best position to speak, to those Hispanics, many of which either we lost them in this election as Democrats, or, many of which aren't really even sure where they should go next time around. And they really need, somebody with sort of that communication skill and the experience. And so I echo your sentiments, but clearly your opinion is far more valuable than mine. So with that being said,
and we do need somebody that understands the Cuban community, because that is where we lost most of the votes in Miami. I call it the red zone. And, I was in media for a long time at WQBA and Telemundo, so I know the market very well. And you really have to have a deep understanding of all the different types of Latinos. We're just not Latinos. We're Cubans, Venezuelans, Colombians, Nicaraguans. So, he understands language, and I think that's going to help all of Florida, because we are such a diverse group in Florida. It's amazing. So,
guys, listen, I do think that we have to come to the realization, just the fact that Bernie was running hurt Democrats, especially with, the fact that the Democratic Party has someone who called themselves a socialist running in the primary hurts. I am a firm believer in the Black Lives Matter movement. Do I think it should have been called Black Lives Matter 2? I think that's important. And one of the things, I get from my Republican friends say, all lives matter. And I'm like, no, dumbhead. If all lives cannot matter until Black lives matter equally. That's an important thing. And we have to be able to sell that. When you talk about defunding the police, well, guess what? Republicans actually have a longer track record of taking funds from the police department.
Yes.
That was a bad marketing point, because the truth is that the defund the police movement is actually putting more money into police services, and we're going to have, more psychologists, more social workers in the police.
Right.
Now, the police union pushed back, and we didn't harp on this, because guess what? Those folks don't get the same union benefits, so it's less money in the union's pocket, and that's why they came up with that Blue Lives Matter thing to contradict it, because it was a union money thing. But the truth is, overall police budgets increase with a defund the police movement. So I do think that we have a marketing issue that we have to spread. I mean, I think it's important for people to realize Black Lives Matter is actually a real important movement. I'll go to the grocery store sometimes in a t-shirt and flip-flops and think nothing of it. But if an African American goes to the grocery store wearing the same thing, he's going to get followed by the security all the time. If a Black man goes to an ATM dressed like that, there's issues. I mean, for us to bury our heads in the sand and not realize that racism exists, and that it is harder if you are dark-skinned to get a lot of the things that sometimes some of us take for granted, then we're doing nothing as a country. We need to acknowledge these struggles.
And I will tell you, JC, I would be remiss. First of all, I agree with you, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you this is probably good for an entire hour show, this whole conversation around all of this. But
getting back.
I would be remiss. I mean, I practice heavily in the criminal defense sector, and I was a former prosecutor for 5 years. I didn't just do a few years or whatnot. I went all the way up, almost all the way up the ranks. And I can tell you, it is real what you are saying. Okay, the fact that if you are darker skinned, the likelihood that you will have police contact goes up exponentially. I've lived it. I've done marketing campaigns around this. In fact, I will tell you, and again, we'll leave it for another day, but I've done marketing campaigns where I'm marketing for possession of cannabis, and of, the 30 calls that I received in Broward County, guess the color of the skin of all the 30 who responded to that marketing campaign. That to me was fascinating, and I will repeat it as many times as I need to in order to help this issue. But I don't want to get off topic, and we need to bring you to a close because we have two amazing people that we want to speak to. But JC, I thank you, and I know I say this on behalf of Lourdes as well, for joining us. There were some questions that I would have loved to have brought up, some details. There were some questions in the comments, Lourdes, about
next show.
Yes, exactly.
We're gonna have to do the JC hour.
The JC hour for
JC
sure.
Hour. Next time.
Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
My
and your beautiful
wife
family.
will hate you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving.
You too, and love to the family.
Thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving. Good night, folks.
Thank you. Good night.
Happy Thanksgiving. Well, our next guest is one of my favorite people in the whole world, Chris Wills. I met Chris about a year ago in Orlando when he was trying to give people free ice cream for Joe in a promotion. And he was back then working for Joe. And I said, "Are you an employee of Joe?" And he says, "No, I'm a volunteer. And I used to be a Republican." And I said, "You're kidding."
And your eyes opened like, what?
And I said, well, why Joe Biden? What made you, first of all, what made you change? And like JC, you were a Republican, and now you're an amazing fan of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. So what made you change?
Thank you so much, Lourdes. And it's really an honor to follow JC. He's somebody that I admire quite a bit. We were actually in the trenches together on night of the 2016 election, and both shed a few tears that evening as we saw Trumpismo and Donald Trump win. Unfortunately, for the last 4 years, we've seen the impacts of that. Personally, I left the Republican Party the day after Donald Trump won the primary here in the state of Florida. The sitting governor at the time, Rick Scott, endorsed Donald Trump at that point, which meant that me having on my voter registration card a member of the Florida Republican Party, they were wearing my membership as a badge of honor, and that was not representative of everything that I had been raised to believe in by my Cuban mother, my Venezuelan father, and so many members of my community. I grew up in Catholic schools here in South Florida, and the values that I was seeing being espoused by Trump and the Trumpistas just were totally contrary to everything that I had been fighting for so hardly, so much. And so I left and haven't looked back since. Very quickly looked to registering as a Democrat in the 2018. Well, in 2016, we obviously voted for Hillary, as I know. Like I said, we were with JC, and then in 2018, for that gubernatorial primary, to be able to vote in the primary, I registered as a Democrat and have been working to help elect Democrats up and down the ballot ever since. I worked in the Congressional District 26 and 27 races in 2018, helped flip those seats for Donna Shalala and Debbie Mukersel-Powell. So it was a real big blow and real pain to see that those seats flipped back this past election cycle. And it's a lot of what you all said at the beginning of this segment. The Republicans are very good, and having worked in the Republican Party, they're very good at message discipline, right? If you actually watched any of the campaign ads that were airing on television for any of the Republicans that were running against any of the Democrats, every one of those Democrats was a socialist and wanted to defund the police. It didn't matter who it was, whether you were talking about Daniela Levine Cava. Steve Bovo said she wanted to defund the police and that she was a secret socialist. Joe Biden, same thing. I saw it for Jose Javier Rodriguez, for Javier Fernandez. We saw it for so many of these candidates. And unfortunately, I think too many on our side, on the Democratic side now, don't take it seriously enough. They think, well, we know it's not true. And since it's not true, nobody's going to believe it. And the reality is that in the age of social media, lies travel around the world a whole lot faster than facts and truth do, right?
Absolutely.
And probably the biggest reason for that is precisely Donald Trump, right? Just tonight, one of the big, fronts on which we have to continue fighting this battle, and we need to win this battle, is Spanish language radio. And just this evening, I was listening to Radio Actualidad, 10:40 a.m., Agustin Acosta, Karines Moncada. Every day are on that station. And look, I have great respect for Agustin Acosta. I worked with him at Radio Pasa. Again, this is the world that I came from, right? I came from the Catholic world, the world of people that were trying to do good things in this community. And what has happened to so many of these people makes me very concerned, because Agustin Acosta tonight tells his audience, we don't spread misinformation or lies on this show. And literally just a few breaths later tells his audience that in Michigan, there were thousands of votes more than the amount of people that were registered to vote. And that is a blatant lie. I was not able to call in, and I do on occasion call into these stations and challenge them, and I encourage many of our supporters. That's one of the things that we did, Lourdes and I together, and many others did very effectively this past election cycle, getting our supporters to listen to these stations so we know what we're up against, but not just listen. Understand that these are the stations that their neighbors, their family members are listening to, and we need to have our voice on there as well. So we call in and we combat that. I didn't get the opportunity, but asking him, tonight, where are you finding this data, because it doesn't exist, right? There is no credible source except for that what his response was to his audience. He says, look, it's not me saying this. I wouldn't say this if it wasn't coming from a credible source. You know what the source was? The President of the United States of America. And
Exactly.
that's the problem. That's the problem. So prior to Trump, you always had crackpots and crazy people that were putting out these insane ideas that just made no sense and were based in no fact whatsoever. But the media and people even on social media at the time didn't pay attention to it because it was viewed as a fringe idea. It was, that's crazy. Why would we ever believe that? But now we have the President of the United States tweeting and retweeting and sharing this and verbally saying this garbage. And so people say, well, who has more credibility than the President of the United States? And that is the problem that we are in. We cannot afford for the Democratic Party to ever again look at the lies that are being put out about them and count them as insignificant. And since they're not true, nobody's going to believe them. You need to take them seriously, and you need to actually stand up and not let yourself be defined. So, Lourdes asked, why Joe Biden? Because I knew who Joe Biden was, and I think that's one of the big reasons why this country chose Joe Biden as its president, right? We are in a tremendous time of crisis. We started the segment, you saw I was wearing the voted mask, and the reason is, we've got 263,000 of our fellow Americans dead. And in a time of crisis, the country needs and wants somebody that they know, that they feel comfortable with. They have that comfort level that this guy knows what he's doing. He's done this before, and we can trust him. We can trust him. And that's what I saw in Joe Biden even before COVID was around, right? Because we were, even before COVID, in a time of crisis, the crisis that Trump and Trumpism created. We needed somebody that the country would go to and say, wow, this guy's spewing all these lies, all these crazy things, all this chaos, because it's been nonstop chaos for 4 years of Donald Trump.
So we needed a grown up, right?
We needed a grown up and somebody
that can heal us, that can be normal, that
we can trust.
That is not a narcissistic personality, and is caring and loving. And I always said we needed a healer, and that's what Joe is. And I think it's beautiful, the way that you've explained this to us. But what do you think? You were in the trenches. You were, and I have to give you credit, you said we need to excite people. And you created the caravans. There were caravans all over. And then what happened? The Republicans said, gee, that's a good idea. And they stole your idea. But we had a great time. We've united so many people. We made so many friends. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do that would be better? What would you improve? Yeah, because you know what? We already went through this. And we lost a very dear senator of ours, Bill Nelson. And we thought we learned from that. And now we are going through this. So it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the margins, what Hillary had. We talked about it in the beginning. They increased by 205,000 people just in Dade County. So what is it that we need to do? I know we need to get on radio and TV and maybe a little bit more radio, because that's what our market does. Just like in the Haitian community, they listen to radio in Creole. They have a different language than we do. So if you had to do it all over again, let's think of maybe 3 things that you would change that would make it easier for us in the future.
So we need a long show for that. But
we would have you back for an hour too.
I'll try and keep it to those 3. I think that the most important thing that where we lost a lot of ground in Miami-Dade County. And I'll be honest with you guys. I said to folks on the campaign, we were on track to losing Florida. But before I said that, I actually pointed out to people, had we not done the caravans, had we not built that excitement, that opportunity for people to see that there were other Biden supporters out there in the Hispanic community, because what Trump was doing over the last 4 years was moving the line from what we had experienced for many election cycles, where people equated being Cuban with being Republican. He was trying to move the line to, you're a Latino, you're a Hispanic, so you must be voting for Trump, right? That's what he was trying really hard to do. And quite frankly, we weren't doing very much on the ground to combat that. So giving people that visibility and that excitement that there were other Biden supporters amongst the Cuban American community. There were other Cubanos con Biden and Venezolanos con Biden and Colombianos con Biden and Boricuas con Biden and todos con Biden, right? Giving them that sense of community and forcing them to work within their communities to organize these caravans, right? And to get more volunteers and get more people engaged really helped us in a big way, because the numbers that I was looking at put us in a position to, for the first time in a long time, losing Miami-Dade County. And what that would have meant, that potentially Daniela Levine Cava would not have won, because if you look at Daniela Levine Cava's percentage, it matched Joe Biden's percentage countywide exactly, right? So where the Biden voters went, they pretty much went for Daniela Levine Cava as well, right? So what we were doing on the ground really helped to build up those numbers, but more needed to be done. More needed to be done. And
I heard you a lot on radio. And,
yeah, so
and you were very good on messaging when you were doing those interviews. Is that something that needs to be done a little bit more?
So those three things, right? So it's message discipline, but specifically making sure that we're not allowing the Republican message to define us, right? We need to define us, right? It was so painful to me knowing what a good guy Joe Biden is, and why I so proudly supported him from the beginning, to hear fellow members of our Hispanic community and others say Biden's a pedophile. Why did that happen? That happened because too many allowed those silly memes that were ridiculous, like they were literally weird angle pictures that you can take of anybody, right? They allowed those to be streamed online nonstop, and then nobody or very few people actually tried to combat that and define Biden as a good Catholic family man. They let the Republicans, the Trumpistas, define him, and that hurt, right? They let the Trumpistas define us as socialists, as people that were going to defund the police. We can't let that happen. So number one, we need to define ourselves. How do we do that? Being more present on radio, and not just traditional media, but social media, right? Defining who we are, not just in word, but also in action, right? So that would be two. We need to define ourselves in action by being present in the community year round, not just present at your door when we need you to vote, or present on your phone.
That's what the Republicans do year round. They are always there. Mm-hmm.
And the great thing in Lourdes is that there are so many, both Lourdes and Ivette, I'm excited to tell you that there are so many that are eager to get this work started, right? Just this past weekend, it was Joe Biden's birthday, and instead of our supporters staying at home, just sending a little message on social media, happy birthday, Joe Biden. No, they went out into the community and they did a caravan for a cause, where we collected food for Camilla's house. We collected food for the hurricane victims in Central America. And we did so standing in front of supermarkets and places like Target with our Biden shirts on. And I'm telling you, the impact of that was very, very strong, because we had people approach with a donation that said, you know, I voted for Trump, but I support this cause, right? And that's how unity begins, right? That's how you get people to start seeing this isn't about Trump or Biden or Republican or Democrat anymore. It's about what Joe Biden is building up. And that would be what I would say is the number 3. And that's where party leaders come into play. And that is making sure that we do everything possible to emulate what Biden has done his entire life, which is build a big tent, be a consensus builder, reach out to other people, and understand that none of us, whether it's at our family level, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, none of us get anything done unless we work with other people, even when we don't agree with them. And that is what Joe Biden has done his entire life. And one of the top reasons why I supported him from the beginning, because we all say we want the president and Congress to get stuff done, just solve the problems, put the partisanship aside. And that's what Joe Biden represents. So the party leaders at the local level with the DECs, the statewide parties, the national party, this push that there was prior to this election to bring the party hard left to the side of the progressives to excite the base, right? That's not the way to go. And Joe Biden's election proves that, right? There is room for the progressive movement in Joe Biden's party, right? In Joe Biden's Democratic Party. But there's also room for former Republicans like myself and like JC. There's even room for current Republicans like Ana Navarro, right? So this is what needs to happen at the lower level, and it needs to happen from the grassroots all the way to the top, because everybody needs to be building on unity. We've been saying for the last few weeks, unity begins with me, right? We need absolutely less ideology, more humanity, and realize that we're all in this together, right? The 163,000 of our fellow, 263,000 of our fellow Americans have lost their lives. And that wasn't 263,000 Republicans or 263,000 Democrats. It was 263,000 Americans. And in a lot of ways, I have looked at these last 3 weeks that it pains me that tonight it's 3 weeks since the election and we still have a sitting president who won't accept the results of the election. But in these last 3 weeks, in this time of crisis that we've been facing in this country, I really feel that Joe Biden has been saying and doing exactly the right things to bring the country together and to start healing our hearts in a lot of ways, in the same way that George W. Bush did right after 9/11, bringing the country together in a time of crisis to say, forget who the hell you voted for, right? Let's come together and solve this, because we can. We always have been able to excel at every single challenge that is put before the United States of America. We've been able to solve it and do it together. And he's been saying that since the day he launched his campaign. There's nothing the United States of America cannot do if we do it together. And that's
you know something, Chris. This is one of the reasons I wanted you on the show, because when I first met you and having worked with you for the past year, you are a leader. And I hope that the Democratic Party recognizes that, because we need people like you that have it in their hearts, that are not involved because they want to run for office or they want to, have an ego. You are the real deal. And I'm so happy that you joined us. You're the one who taught me all this stuff about, doing these programs, because he was Mr. Zoom. I didn't do this before, but I saw what Chris did and all the groups that he put together. And I don't know if Ivette ever had the pleasure of meeting you, but I wanted her to meet.
Apparently we did.
Yeah.
We figured that one out.
And when you run again for office, Ivette, Chris Wills is going to run your campaign because he's one of the best I have ever worked with. And we thank you so much for being with us. And we're going to end the show with our professor, Eduardo Gamarra from FIU, my favorite.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, Eduardo.
Hi, Lourdes. Hi, Ivette.
How are you?
Hola, doctor. Nice to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I almost feel, I mean, after those two lessons just finished, this is the show should end now.
No, not at all. No, we need your wisdom.
You're going to wrap it up for us.
Exactly. Well, Lourdes, I'll go ahead and talk to the doctor for a little bit, Dr. Gamarra. So, of course, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who don't know, Eduardo Gamarra is a professor at FIU, and he's been doing research in Miami for over 30 years. You've worked on presidential campaigns in the U.S. and all over Latin America. You're a very highly respected expert in Latin American cultures and their politics, which is obviously with the theme of our show and what we're trying to accomplish. You are essential to us with your expertise. And one of the last times that we had you on, we got an opportunity to know a little bit about the research that you've done and some of the findings that you've made even before this election. I don't recall whether we already had you on after the election, but what we were really interested in hearing from you was sort of from that analytical, that the data, that sort of component of it. ¿Qué pasó en Miami? What happened with Democrats in Miami? Can you please share some of your thoughts on that with us?
Sure. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to be redundant with what JC said at the beginning of your show. But I think, right now, one of the real issues that's happening, and I think it's important perhaps for me to start at the end rather than explain why, and it has to do with the way forward, right? I think the Democratic Party sort of has had a couple of weeks of a lot of internal recriminations, mea culpas, that kind of stuff, and to a certain extent, it was healthy, and to a large extent, it was unhealthy. But I think now the Democrats are sort of at that place where they're charting a path forward. And I think that's a good place to be. But understanding what happened in Miami is, of course, very, very important. And Lourdes has heard me say this a lot because I've said it recurrently over the last 2 or 3 years. And part of the problem with the Democratic Party in Florida, not only in this cycle, but historically, has been that the party always starts late. And particularly in this cycle, the party started very late. And that, in contrast to what the Republicans do, of course, is the Republicans never cease campaigning. They are constantly campaigning, and they're campaigning weekly, they're campaigning daily. Everything is part of a campaign. And also something that's very important with the Republicans that has been said by both Chris and JC is that they have an extraordinary discipline of message, right? If you contrast that with the Democratic Party, we start late, and then it's very difficult to develop a good, solid, short and concrete message, right? The second thing, and this is the more problematic one, is that I believe the Democrats historically have taken groups for granted, right? And that includes groups that we assume they're by definition Democrats, Puerto Ricans, African Americans. And in this cycle, unfortunately, I think we believed very early on that it was unnecessary to campaign with Colombians, to campaign with other Latinos, Nicaraguans, Dominicans, etc. until it was late, until it was in fact quite late. As Chris pointed out, the party did do something very interesting. The groups Biden, Colombians with Biden, there was even a Bolivians for Biden section there, right? But
we did that just for you, Eduardo.
I know, I was the only Bolivian in the group. But the issue is that they were very well-intentioned efforts, but probably very late in coming, right? And so I think there's a very, very significant dimension there that Democrats have to learn and have to not repeat in the future, right? There is not a single group that Democrats ought to take for granted. Because frankly, if you look at the other side, they don't take any groups for granted. And they assume that everybody is really up for grabs, right? It's almost kind of like, let me be religious for just a moment. It's almost as Catholics proselytizing in Latin America and Protestants, especially evangelicals, right? Evangelicals assume that all Catholics are easy prey. That they should be evangelized. And what they have been doing is now, picking a lot of Catholics into evangelical groups. The fastest growing churches in Latin America are evangelicals, largely because of that approach. And Republicans have that same approach with Democrats. Democrats are there because, they're in fact there for the picking. They're not very disciplined. They're not really true believers, right? And we can sort of pick and choose and select them. And this, I think, happened especially with the other Latinos. And that I'm going to say a couple of things about that in just a moment. The third fact and factor, again, Lourdes has heard me say this. Democrats want to do a lot of things with Democrats except study them. Except really, investigate where they are.
Research.
Right. And so, again, this is a very, very big contrast with what the Republicans do. The Republicans have spent a lot of money in constructing databases and being able to basically, through data analytics, really target groups. They target specific groups, they go after them relentlessly, and they convert them, right? And they did that in 2018 in the midterm elections with African American women, as we know. And they did it this time with Colombians, with Venezuelans, with Dominicans, now we know, right? And so in large measure, where's the difference in Miami-Dade County? And here I'm going to say something that I've been involved in a little bit of a controversy over this, because a lot of the Cuban American population is going through this. On the one hand, the Republicans who think that 75 or 80% of Cuban Americans voted for Donald Trump, and what exit polls tell us is that only about 55% of Cuban Americans voted for Donald Trump, and that's a significant difference, right? We won't really know, but I think it's probably not as high as Republicans claim, and probably, a little bit closer to what the exit polls tell us. But what does that say about Miami-Dade County as a whole? That the real shift, that where the votes for Trump really came from, probably are from Venezuelans, Colombians, Dominicans, and the other Latinos that we've been trying to essentially say they're Democrats, they voted Democratic in the past, we don't need to put much effort into them. In my own polls, we saw a 20% shift, right? That's very significant among those groups. Whereas among Cuban Americans, the shift may have been 6, 8, maybe 10%. So I think we have to understand there that, and I'll end with this, just simply saying that it seems to me that our campaign, to a certain extent, right, while there was a group of Cubanos for Biden, right, I think a lot of what we've done in campaigns is to assume that Cubans, by definition, are Republicans. And therefore, we ought not spend that much of an effort in trying to keep those who are Democrats as Democrats, right? And within that, we also have a very, very large group of people, especially among Hispanics. And again, Lucas has heard me say this often. It's NPAs, right? Non-party affiliates. More Latinos registered in this state as NPA than they do as Republicans. And yet our focus didn't really pay much attention to that group, to that very large group.
No, and one of the things that, I live in Pembroke Pines. And I say that we were kind of invaded by the Trumpistas here in Pembroke Pines. And we are seeing a migration from Miami, moving into Pembroke Pines, into Miramar, into Weston, into Coral Springs, into Hollywood. And we have to keep track of that. In fact, in Weston, we have 5 elected officials, and they were all Democrats. And now we have 3 that are Republicans. So there's a shift happening. So we have to become aware. I get very frustrated when I go to Century Village to visit my friends, and you always see the mezuzah on the door because it used to be a very heavily Jewish community. And now they open the door and they go, hola. and I can't tell you what % of Century Village is Hispanic because we've never researched it. And I've talked to a lot of the elected officials in Broward. I said, we need to start defining areas in Broward, and we need to research how many areas are getting more and more Hispanic. We have the area of Weston that we always assume that they have a very high % of Venezuelans, but when you really look at the population, it's more Colombian. So we just make these assumptions. We just kind of throw them out there. We're getting a huge population of Haitians that are coming here. I guess the housing is very, very high in Miami, and they're moving to Broward. So if you don't do research and you don't watch immigration, figures and where people are migrating to, coming from my background of Telemundo, we wouldn't exist if we didn't do research. And you can't sell a product if you don't know who you're selling to.
Of course.
Dr. Gamarra was so kind to travel all over the state with in 2018 and teaching us, what happened in 2018. Are we going to do it again, Eduardo? Are we going to go all over the state? Now we don't have to
We can
go.
do it via Zoom now.
Do it via Zoom. I would love for you to do that market study that you did. I'm sure you're probably working on it already at FIU.
Yeah, in fact, we've started. We've made some very significant progress in looking at basically the results precinct by precinct, right? And it's very, very interesting to see, for example, just in Miami-Dade, how that vote really cuts, in some very interesting ways, and for example, Hialeah, right? In Hialeah, 69 to 70% of some precincts went for Donald Trump. The majority went for Donald Trump, right? Unincorporated Dade also in those proportions. But then if you go outside of those 2 areas, right? Coral Gables, if you go, Key Biscayne, if you go to Aventura, if you go to different parts of the city, you can see exactly where Democrats reside, right? You can almost do a map. And as I think Chris was saying, Danielle won exactly where Biden won, right? And that's very clear in the sense that it also tells us that there are Cuban Americans who live in districts that are non-working class who are Democrats, right? And that's one of the more surprising things, frankly, because, it appears to be that in the lower income neighborhoods of Miami, Trump has much higher support than among the higher income neighborhoods, right? Which means that Trump's supporters among Hispanics are exactly the same as his white supporters, right? That's very interesting. And then trying to explain that vote, especially when you think about how high Obamacare is, how high consumption of Obamacare is in places like Hialeah, then I have to ask yourself, what's the logic behind that, right? And that's where you get to the other big area where, again, some of the polling will show this. But when you look specifically at the messaging that Republicans used, right? The reliance on essentially fake news. But the way in which, again, Chris demonstrated this in his statements a couple of moments ago, that you always ask yourself, why is it that Latinos believe this? Why did they believe that, that Joe Biden is a pedophile, or that George Soros is funding, every evil thing in the world, or things of that kind? Well, not only because they get reproduced in the Miami Herald and in Actualidad Radio and so on, but because the president says so. And because our local officials repeated the message, right? And so it's not, I think, the unfair rap that Hispanics in Miami are getting, especially outside of Florida. Right? When you read the papers and even the New York Times, for example, it appears as if well, we were just a bunch of ignorant Latinos who voted for Trump, not really understanding first and foremost that more Latinos, that Biden actually won the Latino vote by a lower margin, but he won the Latino vote. But more importantly, that it's the same messaging. It's that messaging that essentially worked, right? But also that the Republicans organized and they developed a grassroots among those groups with that messaging. That's what worked. And so there are lessons to be learned from our side as well.
Dr. Gamarra, I have 2 questions for you. And so you said quite a bit, and my question may not be directly to what you just finished with, but I had made some notes of it. We often get sort of this whole push that, we just need to register more voters. We need to register more voters. However, I happen to know, I'm not going to say for a fact, but there is a gentleman that works campaigns from a data standpoint that I have an immense amount of respect for. So it's not like I've seen the numbers myself. I'm taking this off of somebody else, but this person is incredibly credible. And what this person would tell me all the time is we're always focused on registering more voters, but when you look at the numbers, we have a large majority already. Why are we not more focused on actually talking to the voters that we know are already registered as Democrats? And if we were able to get them excited enough and, out to the polls, we could win. Not to say that we're going to ignore voter registration, but I just know that we're constantly, a lot of the advice is, well, we just have to get out there and get more people registered. But if we're not effectively communicating with the ones who are already registered, then where's all that time, money, resource, and energy going? And so I would really love your feedback on that and some input.
Look, for so many years, in fact, for so many decades, we have had the problem of very low Latino voter turnouts and very low levels of voter registration. That the focus has always been on voter registration. But as you very clearly pointed out, Ivette, that's an approach that needs to continue, but it can't be the whole thrust of the effort, right? Because in fact, you will see that when the final data comes out on voter participation this time around, we had a very high turnout.
We did.
Right? And also let's remember that among certain groups, for example, Cuban Americans register and vote at a higher rate than white Americans. Okay, so that's not really the issue. The issue, I think, is organization.
Right.
It's developing a grassroots, ability, right? I mean, if you just listen to the critique by Republicans of what the Democratic effort was, right? It's essentially, I can't believe the Democrats would try to win an election in Florida with no grassroots, right? It's not that the Democratic Party had no grassroots, it's that it was developed very late, right? And therefore it wasn't very deep. And so I think that that's the kind of effort that has to be ongoing. It can't be something that you do 3 months before the election. It has to have started already now for 2022. Because as Lourdes will remember from 2 years ago, shortly after the election, I said, you have to start early. And somebody asked me in the audience, well, when should we start? And I said, you should have already started.
Right.
We should have already started for 2022 because the Republicans have already started for 2022.
Of course.
Well,
they started even before the election.
That's one of the reasons we're doing this program.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I've talked to many Democrats, and I've encouraged them, especially the young people, to create their own shows, so that we can have a program that caters to the young, a program for the Haitian community in Creole, a program that talks to African Americans, a program for Bolivians.
Well, and Lourdes, keep in mind that with the policies that the immigration policies that the United States has had with Cuba, over all these decades, I mean, essentially Cubans in many respects get a fast track to citizenship by comparison to most other, and I hesitate to say all other because I don't want to say I don't want to give misinformation, but I believe maybe even to all other countries in the world, Cubans get the fastest track. What does that mean? That means that one arrives and approximately 5 years after arrival, that's it. They can have a voice. And I may be off on the timing exactly, but just to kind of articulate the point, they can automatically have a voice, but they haven't really had the opportunity to understand what we were founded upon and the principles, and that socialism, is and communism taking hold here is practically an impossibility. And so I bring that out because I kept thinking about that. These are the voters, but many of them just became citizens. So they're easy prey, if you will. And I don't mean to be flippant in saying that, for the Republicans. So that was one of my
work harder and smarter. That's what we're going to have to do.
I would say, if you allow me to just simply summarize what I think I learned from JC and from Chris, right? I would say that there are really 4 things that you need to do, right? You need to define yourselves, right? The party, we don't, it had a real definitional issue this time around, and we allowed the other side to define, what the Democrats were about. Secondly, there needs to be a grassroots effort. That has to be a constant, continual effort. Third, you have to develop a funding structure, something that doesn't come in, with Mr. Bloomberg at the very end of the campaign. This needs to be constant, And then finally, and probably the more important thing, is the recruitment of good leaders, right? Because in the end, I think we've had some, at least those that I observed, the Javier Fernandez's and the JJs of the world, right? Who unfortunately lost, but those I think are sort of the role models, right? That the party needs to look for, people that are absolutely, how should I put it, pure, right, as the driven snow, right? That don't have any skeletons in their closet. And I think, there's a very big effort that needs to be made across Florida. I would add one final element, and that is, look, we don't really know how to approach the rural areas of Florida, right? And this is an urban party. It's an urban party nationwide, right? And And the Democrats are going to have to break through that. They're going to have to break through that somehow. That's a long-term project. But we need to be able to win Florida. We're not going to only be able to win it by winning the cities.
What an incredible moment to segue into one question that I had for you about Florida and Florida's Democratic Party and leadership. You said something very obvious, but that is sort of, that something that the points aren't always connected, right? So we talked a lot about South Florida issues, essentially, right? And Latinos and Hispanics voting in South Florida and whatnot. But the reality is that if we're going to have leadership in Tallahassee, that leadership has to have the ability, right, to message and communicate with these Hispanics and these urban communities, but likewise has to have the skills and the ability to figure out how to connect with the rural voters. And so today there was some really exciting news that Mayor Manny Diaz, is interested and wants the job. Let me not say wants. Definitely is interested and is a candidate to become the leader of the Democratic Party in Florida. And so I would really like to know your thoughts on that. I know you've been in South Florida for a very long time. Does Mayor Manny Diaz, have sort of the skills that are needed, and how does somebody like Mayor Manny Diaz, who comes from South Florida, right, where we're like, there's South Florida and there's North Florida, how does he get into that position and, rally us down south and do what needs to be done, but simultaneously have a strategy that incorporates, the rural part of the state? And I think that that's a big challenge, because at the end of the day, Lourdes and Dr. Gamarra, you guys know the Republicans are in control in Tallahassee. So there needs to be somebody up there that is able to work their way through all of this. So what are your thoughts about Mayor Manny Diaz having this role? On the spot.
The coach. Oh,
Mayor Manny Diaz.
Look, I think probably the greatest and most important challenge that the Democrats have right now is selecting new leadership in Florida, and that's I don't think that there's a more important decision that the Democrats have to make, and without casting any judgment over previous leadership, but it's clear that the party needs to go in a direction that's able to do those things that JC and Chris just talked about, and which I just summarized. And so you really need somebody that has that kind of vision. Now, I happen to like the former mayor a lot, not only because he's an FIU grad, right, but because he was a very talented mayor, and who wasn't just mayor of Miami, but had a national projection. So I think he does have those skills right now that the party absolutely needs. But I think at the same time, I think it would be a mistake to just look at the mayor as somebody who's going to be able to bring back or recruit Cuban Americans into the party, right? And I think probably the mayor is most aware of that, because there are so many constituencies in Florida that he will need to build upon. For example, it's very clear that the African American community, how many times, Lourdes, have I said that the most disciplined, perhaps the only really disciplined Democrats in Florida are African Americans. And so it's very important not to forget about African Americans and be able to bring them into the fold, right? So whoever's the leader of the party has to be able to bring them into the fold. Secondly, the thing about funding that we've talked about, I think the mayor, not only because of his linkages with the other mayor, Bloomberg, right, But I think Manny Diaz would be somebody that would give the party a jump start on the funding issue, the permanent funding that will allow the party to develop, especially the research part that I've been pushing for many, many years. Why? For example, one of the things that we learned very late, let me just segue a little bit into this. We discovered sort of in the month of July, because that's when the ACS survey released some of its more recent data. We discovered that there are 369,000 Mexicans who are eligible to vote in the state of Florida, right? That's third only to Cubans and to Puerto Ricans. And yet when you ask anybody, how did Mexicans vote? Nobody knows. When you ask where the Mexicans are, the usual answer is Homestead.
And Polk County, where the Democrats did have a show in Polk County, where there's 250,000 Mexicans.
Right.
So we kind of know where they are. But,
yeah,
but you're 100% right.
But there was no targeting of
exactly
voters, right. These are the kinds of groups that would be natural Democrats, right? So again, it's knowledge really has to inform strategy. And so I think when you have a leader who's worked with basically large budgets, with managing a very, very large city, and then knowing the different segments within a community, and this is now the entire state that whoever is the leader will have to deal with. So I think Manny Diaz would be an excellent choice. But I'm sure that there are others, right? I'm sure.
Well, we just did a commercial, so this is great. Now we're going to edit it, and
we should know, however, what the nature of the challenge is.
Yeah,
it's something to take lightly.
And one of the things before we leave, because we are running out of time, we've been on for almost an hour and a half. I want you to tell us a little bit about the new book that you, yes, because I'm going to buy it. And I want you to explain it a little bit, because I find it very intriguing, the people you put together to write this book, a little bit what it's about and who's involved.
Yeah, this is a book that came out of a conversation that Patrick Murphy was having with David Jolly. Patrick Murphy, of course, a former Democratic member of Congress, and David Jolly, a former Republican member of Congress. And in conversations with Dario Moreno, Brian Fonseca, and myself at the university, about a year ago, we sort of came up on the idea of producing a book that would really look at the state of the situation in the United States, right? This is a deeply divided country, a polarized country, where essentially what has happened is that the center has been hollowed out, right? Now, this is a long historical process, right? But the logic of the book was sort of to bring together a Republican and a Democrat on the political side, and a Republican and a Democrat on the academic side. Dario Moreno, of course, is one of the most outstanding academic advisors of the Republican Party. And we have been friends for 35 years, right? And we have some phenomenal discussions. And I usually, end up getting a little upset, and he laughs it off, right? But that was sort of the nature of what the project was about. The title of the book is A Divided Union, right? And the logic is basically to see several areas where this polarization has really become insurmountable. Areas that both Jolly and Murphy were able to identify, and which we then commissioned some very significant authors. Nickel Ray, we commissioned Sean Foreman, very well known in the community in Florida, Kathleen DePaulo, who wrote chapters addressing each of these specific areas that we believe are areas in which the center can be reconstructed, where bipartisanship can be reconstructed. And in that sense, I think that the election of Joe Biden kind of moves us in the direction that the book was pushing, right? The need to, and the cabinet suggestions, the cabinet nominations, pardon me, that Mr. Biden put forth today, I think are a step in that direction. It's a combination of diversity, a combination of experience, right? And above all, balance, right? This is not a radical cabinet. And to us, the only way that the U.S. is going to overcome the very difficult challenges it faces is not by running to the extremes, but by running to the center.
Thank you. Very well said.
What was the name of the book again?
A Divided Union.
A Divided Union. And you can get that on Amazon?
You can get it on Amazon, right? Edited by Dario Moreno, myself, David Jolly, and Patrick Murphy.
That's great.
Okay.
Well,
thank you for the plug.
Well, thank you so much. I think maybe what we need to do next time is have David Jolly and Patrick Murphy and all you guys on the show so we can discuss the book, because it sounds fascinating. But that first means that Ivette and I have to read it. So we know the content so we can ask the questions, and we'll get hopefully Leticia Callava back on La Visa Latina. She couldn't do it this week. She knows that I really don't like doing these things. I like being the person in the back.
You did a great job. You did a great job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but when you're doing the background work and you're doing the front work, that's a little too much. And I love sitting back and enjoying the show. And listening to all the speakers and Ivette and also Leticia. But, we need to inform, we need to educate. This is why I urge anybody who's watching, please, if you want to do a show, call me. I'll tell you how to do it. We'll show you how to do it. And right now is the opportunity because we have the internet. We don't have to pay for TV time or radio time. And thank you so much, Eduardo.
Thank you.
You are a treasure.
Thank you, Eduardo. You are.
Thank you, Ivette. And we've all had children, Ivette, so don't feel
I was
knocking on the door, banging down the door.
My son was having a fit in the middle of a show. Sorry, I had to mute. I almost brought him in to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
That's right.
Yeah, but he may have been in a rage. I don't want him to wish anybody a happy Thanksgiving that way. So, well, on that note, again, thank you, Eduardo, from the bottom of our hearts. We are excited to have you back in the future. Super informative. I have a million thoughts, Lourdes, about what was said today and what we can present next time around. And to all our viewers, happy Thanksgiving. We are here. We have a new president. We have so much more to look forward to. And thank you for joining us.
And have a great Thanksgiving. And don't forget to wear your mask. I got this one from Chris. So thanks, Eduardo. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Till
Bye,
next
y'all.
time. Bye-bye.
Until next time, Lourdes. Thank you.